You sold my company? For $900? I whispered, the contract trembling between my fingers. The words so absurd they barely made it past my throat. The living room, once a place of late-night talks and whispered dreams, stretched out cold and unfamiliar around me. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, refusing to meet my eyes, while my mother busied herself rearranging a stack of unpaid bills on the coffee table. They didn't speak, but they didn't have to. The betrayal was written in every line of their faces, in every heavy silence that filled the space between us. $900. That was what my dream was worth to them. $900 to hand over years of sleepless nights, forgotten birthdays, and battered hope to a man named Lucas Bennett, a trust fund entrepreneur whose biggest talent was talking louder than his failures. They said it was for my own good. They said I wasn't ready. They said the deal was the only chance to save the family from sinking under the weight of their own mistakes. They didn't see me. Not really. Not the woman who had built HealthFlow from an idea scribbled on napkins into a system hospitals were already quietly fighting to beta test. Not the mind that had crafted security protocols they couldn't even begin to understand. But Lucas didn't understand either. He thought he was buying code, a brand, a shortcut to legitimacy. He didn't realize he was buying a company guarded by layers of encrypted loyalty. Loyalty that wasn't for sale. Loyalty that knew who its creator was. And Lucas Bennett was about to find out that some things, no matter how many signatures you forge, can never truly be stolen, especially when you sell them for only $900. The next morning, the weight of that contract still pressed against my ribs like a bruise I couldn't hide. I sat at the kitchen table staring at my laptop, the HealthFlow dashboard pulsing quietly on the screen like a living thing waiting for instructions. Every line of code, every sleepless night, every prayer whispered into the blue glow of too many 3 a.m.s was sitting right there, still breathing, still mine in ways a signature could never erase. Yet on paper, it wasn't mine anymore. On paper, I had been erased for less than the price of a decent second-hand car. Dad shuffled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and silent, avoiding my gaze like a man dodging landmines he had laid himself. He poured coffee into a chipped mug, spilling a little on the counter, and muttered something about doing what we had to do. Mom followed, clutching her robe around her like armor, her mouth tight, her eyes darting anywhere but at me. The shame hung between them like smoke, thick and choking, but not thick enough to obscure the facts. Lucas Bennett had wired the money overnight, 9 crisp $100 bills transferred to their sagging bank account, a band-aid on a wound that had long since festered past saving. In exchange, he owned HealthFlow, or so he thought. He owned the name, the public-facing site, the empty shell of what he believed was a revolutionary healthcare system ready to scale. What he didn't own, what he couldn't even begin to touch, was the heartbeat underneath it all. 6 months ago, when the first investor meetings started circling too close, when the questions got sharper and the offers got lazier, I had rewritten HealthFlow's deepest protocols. Quietly, carefully, without telling anyone, not even the advisors who said they believed in me. I embedded biometric locks tied to my own digital signature, buried under layers of decoy code so convincing even seasoned engineers would swear they had mapped the whole architecture. On the surface, HealthFlow looked ready to launch. Underneath, it waited, and without me, it would never run. That afternoon, I packed a single duffel bag, grabbed my laptop, and walked out of the house without a word. No fights, no accusations, no dramatics. Just the sound of the front door clicking shut behind me, as final and quiet as a goodbye whispered to someone who never heard you speak at all. I rented a tiny studio apartment across town, the kind with peeling linoleum floors and windows that stuck in their frames, but it was mine. The first night, I lay awake on a lumpy mattress, the hum of distant traffic slipping through the cracked window, the contract tucked under the mattress like a ghost pressing against my spine. I wasn't angry yet. Anger would come later, hot and bright. That night, all I felt was the cold, clinical understanding that the people who raised me didn't believe I could be more than a liability, to be traded off for survival. The next morning, I built a plan. Not for revenge, not for confrontation, for reclamation. HealthFlow wasn't just lines of code stitched together in some messy digital Frankenstein. It was an extension of me. It knew my signature. It knew my patterns. Without them, it was inert, just pretty architecture waiting for a soul. I knew Lucas would try to launch fast, eager to parade his new acquisition before investors who had laughed him out of boardrooms one too many times. I also knew what would happen the first time he tried. I spent my days freelancing under a pseudonym, building back-end systems for small startups, stacking money in a separate account no one else could touch. At night, I monitored HealthFlow's skeleton framework from an old laptop patched together with duct tape and hope. Every keystroke Lucas's new team made echoed in my system logs. They were rushing. They were careless. They didn't know what they were poking awake. 3 weeks after the sale, the announcement dropped. Lucas Bennett's HealthFlow launch event, featuring the most revolutionary advancement in healthcare technology since the digital stethoscope, scheduled for Friday, 10 a.m., live-streamed worldwide. I stared at the press release splashed across my cracked phone screen, a slow smile pulling at my mouth. They thought they had stolen my life's work. They thought they could polish it up and call it theirs. They didn't know they were about to light a match under their own futures. And I didn't have to lift a single finger to help them burn. Friday came sharp and cold, the kind of morning where the sky looked brittle enough to crack under its own weight. I wrapped my hands around a chipped mug of coffee, laptop perched on the kitchen counter, the HealthFlow launch livestream buffering quietly in the background. Lucas strutted onto the stage at some rented hotel ballroom, wearing a grin so wide it looked painful. He thanked the crowd, flashed a sizzle reel of fake testimonials, rattled off buzzwords like paradigm shift and disruptive technology, with the ease of someone who had never had to build anything from broken dreams and caffeine. I watched without blinking, my heart steady, my pulse even. I wasn't here for the spectacle. I was here for the moment the system demanded what Lucas couldn't give, the biometric key. The part of HealthFlow that lived not in the code or the branding, but in the heartbeat of its creator. Me. Lucas clicked to launch the live demo, the screen behind him flaring bright with the HealthFlow dashboard. Applause rippled through the room. For one breathless second, everything worked. Then the dashboard froze. A low murmur spread across the ballroom. Lucas clicked frantically, panic blooming across his face. The error message blinked up in harsh red letters. Authorization failure, creator verification required, system lockdown initiated. Gasps echoed. The investors stiffened. Lucas's mouth opened and closed like a fish stranded on dry land. I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue like a victory anthem sung soft and slow. And then, for the grand finale, the screen behind him flipped to a legal disclaimer. Ownership rights protected under IP law. Unauthorized deployment detected. For inquiries, contact Isabella Torres. The chaos unfolded exactly the way I knew it would. Investors pulled out their phones, snapping photos, forwarding screenshots to legal teams, faster than Lucas could stammer a half-formed excuse. Reporters scribbled furiously, the scent of blood sharp in the air. Lucas fumbled at the mic, voice cracking as he insisted it was a temporary glitch, a minor technical hiccup, but the damage was already done. HealthFlow wasn't just glitching, it was rejecting him. The system screaming the truth louder than any whistleblower could. I closed the laptop, my coffee long gone cold, and sat back in my chair as the weight of years lifted slowly from my shoulders. No confrontation, no courtroom drama, just the quiet, inevitable consequence of building something with integrity and refusing to let anyone strip it away. Lucas had bought the shell of my work, but the soul of it, the part that mattered, was never his to steal. That afternoon, a call came through from one of the top healthcare conglomerates in the country. They had seen the broadcast. They had read the disclaimers. They wanted to talk to the real mind behind HealthFlow, not the one scrambling for explanations on a stage in front of the whole world. I scheduled the meeting for Monday, my voice calm, my heart steady. I didn't call my parents. I didn't rage or demand apologies that would never come. Some debts aren't collected. Some betrayals aren't patched over with regret. Some bridges are meant to burn. I packed up my laptop, slipped on my jacket, and walked out into a city scrubbed raw by winter winds, the streets gleaming wet and new under the bruised sky. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. The future was waiting, not given, not handed over out of pity, but claimed with every stubborn step forward. And this time, no one was going to sell me out for anything less than everything I was worth. Monday came crisp and electric, the kind of morning that felt like it was holding its breath just for you. I sat across from a panel of executives in a glass-walled conference room, HealthFlow's original schematics projected behind me, every line of code singing a silent testimony to the work they had almost lost. They asked questions, sharp ones, smart ones, and I answered without flinching, letting the years of building, breaking, and rebuilding speak louder than any polished resume ever could. By noon, I walked out of that building with a preliminary contract in hand. No middlemen, no stolen names, just me, Isabella Torres, founder and chief architect of HealthFlow Technologies. The official announcement would take a few weeks, but it didn't matter. In my bones, I knew it was done. I had stepped out from under the shadow of betrayal and into the light of something I had built myself. The first thing I did with the signing bonus wasn't flashy. No cars, no parties, no revenge-fueled shopping sprees. I bought a better laptop, a proper desk, and rented a modest office space in an old brick building that smelled faintly of coffee and ambition. I spent long nights there, mapping out what HealthFlow could become, if nurtured right this time. No shortcuts, no compromises, no desperate grabs for validation. Lucas tried to salvage his reputation in the meantime, releasing hollow press statements about technical miscommunications and transitional challenges. The tech world wasn't buying it. Within a month, his name was quietly scrubbed from most serious conversations, a cautionary tale wrapped in a designer's suit. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching someone trip over their own greed wasn't a victory, it was just gravity doing its job. I focused forward. I focused on the hospitals sending in pilot program requests, on the universities asking me to speak about ethical tech development, on the small team of brilliant misfits I was beginning to assemble, people who believed in doing it right, even when it was slower, harder, lonelier. HealthFlow wasn't just a company anymore. It was a heartbeat stitched together from resilience and stubborn hope. And this time, it would belong to no one but us. By the time spring unfurled across the city, HealthFlow Technologies wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Hospitals across 3 states had adopted our adaptive AI triage system, cutting patient wait times by nearly 30%. Nurses and doctors sent testimonials that didn't read like canned PR, but like exhausted sighs of relief, the kind of gratitude that can't be manufactured with a marketing budget. We hired our 10th full-time employee that April, a cybersecurity specialist who had once walked away from a cushy job at a major firm because she believed ethics weren't optional. I moved into a slightly larger apartment, nothing grand, just enough to breathe a little easier, to cook dinner without knocking elbows against the walls. Some nights, I stayed late at the office, curled up on the battered couch with code glowing on my screen and Sir Whiskerton sprawled lazily across my feet, his purrs blending into the low hum of servers running overnight. The building creaked and whispered like an old friend, a constant reminder that growth isn't always shiny or comfortable, but it is honest. Lucas tried one last desperate move that May, filing a frivolous lawsuit claiming unfair practices and misrepresentation. His lawyers blustered, flinging buzzwords like confetti, hoping something would stick. It didn't. My countersuit, backed by impeccable documentation and digital timestamps burned deep into HealthFlow's framework, crushed the claim before it ever made it past preliminary hearings. The judge's ruling was swift, the dismissal with prejudice sharp enough to leave no doubt. I didn't even attend the final hearing. I didn't need to. I was too busy working with a team of young developers, sketching out HealthFlow's next evolution on a whiteboard stained with the ghosts of 100 bigger dreams. We argued over algorithms and laughed until we cried when one of the interns accidentally locked us out of our own server during a stress test. This was what victory looked like. Not champagne fountains or roaring crowds, but slow, stubborn, relentless building. Brick by painstaking brick. A home no one could evict me from again. The summer melted into a haze of deadlines, demo days, and small victories, stitched together by caffeine and stubborn hope. HealthFlow Technologies was invited to present at a major healthcare innovation summit, an opportunity that would have once sent me into a spiral of self-doubt. Now, standing in front of a packed room, my hands steady on the podium, I spoke, not like someone begging for approval, but like someone offering an invitation. Join us, if you dare to build better. Afterward, hospital administrators, venture capitalists, and young engineers crowded around, peppering me with questions, ideas, partnerships. I took their cards, shook their hands, but inside I smiled quietly, because I knew now that none of them could offer me legitimacy. I had already earned that myself, line by line, day by day, in the dark when no one was watching. Sophia showed up outside the summit venue that afternoon, clutching a bouquet of daisies and wearing an awkward, hopeful smile. She had followed the live stream, she said. She had seen everything. She apologized, not for the first time, for not believing in me when it mattered most, for standing by when others sold pieces of me like scraps. I listened, the old hurt flaring and fading in the same breath. I didn't forgive her in that moment, not fully. Forgiveness, I had learned, isn't an event, it's a process. I thanked her for the flowers. I smiled when I meant it. I promised nothing but the simple, brutal honesty that healing would be slow, messy, and on my terms. We walked together down the street for a while, not speaking much, the city buzzing around us, the gap between who we were and who we had become stretching but not snapping. Some bridges collapse in a single storm. Some erode grain by grain until you find yourself standing on opposite shores, waving instead of building. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you find a way to plant something new across the water. Autumn rolled in heavy and gold, the kind of season that smells like endings and beginnings folded into one. HealthFlow signed its biggest contract yet, partnering with a network of rural clinics to deploy our triage systems where they were needed most, in places the glossy startups forgot existed. The check that cleared our account that month could have bought me the kind of flashy life people chase when they think money fixes everything. I didn't buy a new car. I didn't move to a shinier zip code. I upgraded our servers, expanded our scholarship fund for interns, and bought new chairs for the office, because no one should have to build the future while sitting on furniture that wobbles. One evening, as the sun bled out against the horizon and the first cold winds scratched at the windows, I stood alone in our conference room, staring out over the city I had learned to love on my own terms. I thought about my parents, not with rage, not even with sadness, but with a distant sort of understanding. They had gambled on fear. I had gambled on faith. And sometimes, faith looks a lot like stubbornness when you're standing in the middle of the storm. I still hadn't called them. I didn't know if I ever would. Some silences weren't punishments. They were necessary fences to keep the wild gardens of your life from being trampled again. I didn't wish them harm. I just wished myself peace. Inside the office, the team buzzed with plans for next year. Product expansions, new pilots, outreach projects. Their voices blended into the hum of machines and city life seeping through the cracks. I leaned against the window, feeling the weight of everything we had built pressing into my chest in the best possible way. Not because we had survived the betrayal, not because we had succeeded, but because we had done it without becoming what we hated. The real win wasn't the money. It was the fact that we were still here, still kind, still daring to believe in something better. And we weren't done yet. Winter came fast and sharp, the city streets frosting over before the leaves had even finished falling. HealthFlow Technologies closed the fiscal year stronger than anyone had dared to predict, surpassing targets, securing 2 new international partnerships, and onboarding hospitals in cities I had once only seen through scratched-up windows on late-night bus rides. Our little company, born from betrayal and stubborn grit, had become a name people whispered with respect, not pity. I spent most days buried in the work, coding until my fingers cramped, drafting expansion plans long after the lights in neighboring offices had gone dark. Some nights, though, I let myself pause. I sat by the window in my loft, Sir Whiskerton purring lazily across my lap, watching the snow drift down in soft spirals, and let myself feel it, the slow, steady pulse of a life reclaimed, reshaped, rebuilt. Sophia visited a few times over the winter, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes bringing nothing but the tentative, fragile kind of conversation that blooms when both people know there are things better left unsaid. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't dig at old wounds. We just sat, watching bad TV reruns, laughing at jokes that didn't need history to be funny. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and sometimes that's enough. Lucas faded almost entirely from the industry. His name, a cautionary tale tacked onto late-night forums and whispered over cheap beers at startup mixers. Occasionally, someone mentioned him in passing, a footnote to a conversation about IP law and founder rights. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just filed the knowledge away like a distant weather report. Interesting, irrelevant, unlikely to touch me now. Because the truth was simple and unshakable. I wasn't running from anyone anymore. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone anymore. I had built something they couldn't steal. And more importantly, I had built someone I wouldn't betray for anything. The new year cracked open like a thunderclap, full of possibilities louder than the storms rattling the city windows. HealthFlow Technologies expanded into telemedicine solutions, bridging gaps for patients in remote areas where doctors were too few and hope even fewer. Our engineers, many of them once overlooked, now led development teams. Our interns, scrappy and brilliant, filed patents and published papers with their names proudly at the top. Every success felt stitched together from stubbornness and late nights, each one a silent rebellion against everyone who had ever told us we weren't enough. One chilly February afternoon, I stood on a stage at a National Health Innovation Summit, looking out at a sea of faces: administrators, doctors, investors, students. I shared our journey, not the polished, PR-friendly version, but the messy, battered, glorious truth about what it meant to be betrayed by people you loved, about how sometimes survival isn't enough. You have to choose to rebuild yourself from the wreckage, brick by defiant brick. When I finished, the applause wasn't thunderous, but it was real, steady, solid. A different kind of music than the hollow praise I used to chase. Afterwards, an older woman in a crisp gray suit approached me, her eyes bright with something close to tears. "You made me believe again," she said quietly, pressing a worn business card into my hand. "Not just in innovation, in people." I tucked the card into my pocket without even looking at it, not because it didn't matter, but because I knew by then that real success wasn't measured by who saw you. It was measured by who you became when no one was watching. That night, walking back to the loft under a sky shattered into a million cold stars, I let the silence settle over me like a benediction. No noise, no applause. Just the steady, quiet thrum of a life I had built without shortcuts, without handouts, without permission, and the best part was knowing I was only getting started. March unfolded in steady beats, each day stacking onto the last with the kind of quiet momentum that feels like building something too big to fail. We launched HealthFlow Mobile, a lightweight version of our platform designed for rural clinics and community health workers who carried the weight of entire towns on their backs. The first week, the servers wobbled under the traffic. The second week, we broke our own user records 3 times in a row. By the end of the month, we were onboarding new clients faster than we could train them. The team grew, too, not just in numbers, but in grit, in humor, in the kind of camaraderie that only comes from surviving 100 near disasters together and still showing up the next morning with coffee and stupid jokes. We celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes and hackathons with thrift store trophies. We argued fiercely over code reviews and laughed even harder when someone broke the staging server at 3 in the morning. Wasn't perfect. It was real. Sophia kept her distance mostly, sending the occasional text, holiday greetings, quick updates about their parents, careful questions she didn't push when I didn't answer right away. I appreciated it more than I said. Healing, I had learned, wasn't a race or a straight line. It was a slow rebuilding of trust, brick by hesitant brick. And sometimes it was enough just to know someone still stood on the other side of the rubble. One evening, I stayed late, watching the sun bleed out behind the city skyline while finalizing a grant proposal for expanding HealthFlow into indigenous communities. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and stared out at the deepening blue. I thought about Lucas, about my parents, about all the versions of me they had tried to break, mold, dismiss, and I realized not with bitterness, but with a bone-deep certainty that I had outgrown them. Not because they had shrunk, but because I had chosen to grow in the places they abandoned. And that kind of growth, the kind stitched together from scar tissue and stubborn dreams, was the kind no one could undo. April arrived carrying promises stitched into every warming breeze, the city thawing into something vibrant and restless. HealthFlow Technologies celebrated 3 years since our rebirth with a quiet team dinner. No speeches, no awards, just laughter bouncing off the brick walls and stories about server crashes we now told like old war legends. I sat at the end of the table, a plate of cold pizza balanced precariously on my knee, and looked around at these people who had taken a leap of faith with me, back when all we had was stubbornness and a secondhand coffee maker. Not everyone who started the journey stayed. Some left for grad school, for bigger salaries, for other dreams. I missed them sometimes, but I understood. Growth meant change. It meant letting go without bitterness, trusting that what you built would keep growing even without you watching every step. Sophia sent a card that week. No dramatic apologies, no long letters, just a simple note scrawled in her familiar, messy handwriting. Proud of you, always rootin' for you, always. I tucked it into a drawer full of similar small kindnesses, a quiet reminder that not all losses have to stay sharp forever. Some soften into something else with time, something that doesn't erase the hurt, but gives it context, gives it a place to rest. The real milestones weren't measured in revenue or press coverage. They were in the patient who emailed to say HealthFlow saved her life when no one else believed she needed help. In the clinic nurse who sent a photo of his team laughing around a battered laptop, running our program in a town no one could find on a map. Success wasn't a roar. It wasn't even a song. It was a steady heartbeat, quiet and relentless, echoing in every life we touched. And standing in that small, noisy, imperfect celebration, I realized this was what winning looked like. Not louder, not bigger. It's real. Summer crept in, slow and golden, heavy with the promise of new beginnings stitched into every sunbeam. HealthFlow Technologies launched its largest initiative yet, an open-access platform offering basic healthcare triage to underserved rural communities. No passwords, no payment walls, just help where it was needed. I watched the project go live from my battered couch, laptop balanced on my knees, Sir Whiskerton curled up like a king at my feet. No champagne, no cameras, just a quiet moment, heavy, with the kind of pride that doesn't need witnesses to feel real. Reporters called, investors called. Old classmates who hadn't spoken to me in years sent messages dripping in manufactured nostalgia. Even my parents called once, the voicemail stiff and strange, congratulating me like I was a distant acquaintance they had read about in the papers. I listened to the message once. I didn't call back. Some doors don't slam shut, some just drift closed, slow and inevitable, until one day you realize you've walked too far forward to ever turn around. Sophia visited the office a few weeks later, holding 2 coffees and an awkward, hopeful smile. She toured the space, marveled at the whiteboards crammed with algorithms and bad jokes, shook hands with the interns like she was meeting royalty. Before she left, she hugged me tight and whispered, "You built something beautiful, Bella. No one can take that from you." I squeezed her hand in return, no grand declarations, just gratitude humming low and fierce under my skin. By August, HealthFlow was a name spoken with reverence in circles that once laughed us out of rooms. But more importantly, we were spoken about in clinics, in shelters, in emergency rooms where someone's life had gotten a little bit better because a scrappy team refused to let a good idea die under the weight of greed and betrayal. I spent my birthday that year alone by choice, wandering through the city until sunset smeared the sky with every color hope ever wore. I bought myself a slice of cake from a corner bakery, lit a candle in the tiny apartment I still called home, and made a wish I didn't need to speak aloud. Because the truth was simple. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to them, not even to myself. I had built a life they couldn't sell, couldn't steal, couldn't shrink. And every breath I took inside that life was a victory they could never erase. I used to think survival was the goal. To make it through the wreckage with your heart still beating and your hands still steady enough to hold the pieces. But survival is just the beginning. The real victory comes later, quiet and unceremonious, when you realize you didn't just survive them, you outgrew them. You built something taller, stronger, fiercer than the wreckage they left behind. And you did it without needing them to see it, to clap for it, to apologize for what they broke. I don't wake up thinking about the ones who sold me out anymore. I don't measure my days against their absence or their approval. I measure them in lines of code stitched into life-saving systems, in the laughter of a team that knows the weight of building something real, in the breathless moment when someone says, "Because of you, I'm still here." They wrote me off for $900. They thought that was the end of my story. But it was only the end of the chapter where they had any say in it. The rest, the best parts, are mine to write. And I'm just getting started.